You want to know what the heartbeat of a mid-sized airline looks like? It isn't the billboards with perfect smiles and plastic teeth. It isn't the polished fuselage of a 737 sitting on the ramp like something holy. The heartbeat is a windowless operations bunker that smells like burnt popcorn, cold metal, and a breakdown that's been held off for exactly 1 more hour. The heartbeat looks like me, Nolan Pierce, staring at a wall of monitors at 3:47 a.m., nursing coffee that tastes like it was brewed through an ashtray, praying the de-icing trucks in Minneapolis show up before the FAA decides to start asking questions with a flashlight. For 9 years, I've been the operations lead, which is a neat title for a dirty job. I take the logistical nightmare of flying metal tubes full of tourists and business travelers across the country and make sure those tubes don't pile into the same airspace or get stuck circling Chicago until everyone runs out of fuel and hope. I'm the invisible hand. I'm the reason your bag makes it to Denver, even if your soul didn't survive Nebraska. Our system was called FlightWeave. Sounds sleek, like something a tech founder would name between microdosing sessions. In reality, it was a stitched-together fossil from the late 90s, legacy code written by a guy who's probably retired, relocated, or dead, held together by duct tape logic, prayers, and a handful of overrides that only I knew how to navigate. FlightWeave wasn't software. It was a temperamental animal. Feed it the right data codes and it purred. Touch the wrong setting or optimize without permission, and it could ground a fleet faster than a pilot failing a breathalyzer. That Tuesday started like every Tuesday I'd survived for nearly a decade. I walked into the OCC, felt the server hum vibrating in my teeth, and dropped into my station, the command throne, which was really just a Herman Miller chair with broken lumbar support and a coffee stain shaped like Florida. "Morning," grunted my shift supervisor, Gus, a heavy-set man who looked like a bulldozer with a mustache. He was eating a breakfast burrito that smelled like a chemical incident. "Status?" I asked, logging in. "Eastern Seaboard's a mess," he mumbled. "Storm front in the Carolinas, Boston stacking delays, and the routing server threw a warning light. Tuesday update lag." "Of course it did," I said, fingers already moving. I bypassed the handshake protocol, patched the lag manually, rerouted 3 flights out of Charlotte, and kept the automated panic trigger from firing. The warning light blinked off. Green. Beautiful green. People think planes fly on jet fuel. They don't. They fly on the stubbornness of professionals who refuse to let chaos win. I was feeling steady until 9:06 a.m., when the OCC door swung open and the room filled with expensive cologne and entitlement. Standing there like they'd wandered off a reality show about rich people cosplaying as executives were Preston Harrington, the founder's son, and Sienna Vale, his fiancée, holding a tablet like it was scripture. Preston Harrington had the relaxed posture of someone who had never been told no by a system that mattered. 33 years old, flawless suit that cost more than my annual rent, smile calibrated to look confident without ever meaning anything. He'd spent years finding himself in various time zones while other people kept the airline alive. Now he was back, officially titled Chief Strategy Officer, which translated to too important to ignore, too unqualified to touch anything. Clinging to his side was Sienna Vale, former lifestyle influencer, newly minted operations visionary, eyes permanently glazed with the confidence of someone who has never been responsible for consequences. She held her tablet tight, like it might float away if she loosened her grip. "Nolan," Preston said, voice smooth, friendly, empty. "Just the man we wanted to see." My stomach tightened the way it does when you hear a new noise from your car at highway speed. "Preston," I replied, not standing. "What brings strategy into the nerve center? Something on fire?" Sienna smiled, the kind of smile designed for cameras. "We're here to observe. Your father thinks it's time we really understand the core of the business. You know, streamline." Streamline. The word always lands the same way. It's corporate for cutting out the people who know what they're doing and replacing them with software that doesn't. Right now, I said evenly, I'm rerouting aircraft around a storm system so 300 people don't sleep on an airport floor. So feel free to observe, just don't touch anything. Preston laughed, light and hollow. Always intense, Nolan. Dad loves that grit, but maybe it's time to modernize it, make it scalable. He stepped closer to my monitors, reaching toward the raw routing interface. Don't, I snapped. He froze, hand hovering. Relax, it's just data. It's live data, I said. You touch that screen and you might cancel a fuel order in Detroit. Then you get to explain to a plane full of angry passengers why they're sitting on the tarmac smelling lavatories for 4 hours. He pulled his hand back, jaw tightening for a fraction of a second. The relaxed traveler mask slipped, replaced by the look of a man unused to being corrected. We have a meeting at noon, boardroom. We need to discuss the future. I'm busy keeping the present alive, I replied. Be there, he said, not a request. They turned and left, trailing cologne in certainty. The door closed. The hum of servers felt louder. Gus looked at me over his burrito. That felt bad, he said. Yeah, I replied, eyes back on the screens. That felt like the beginning of the end. The boardroom at noon was all glass and angles, perched above the hangar like a viewing deck. From up there, you could look down at mechanics sweating through grease-stained shirts, while executives sipped sparkling water and talked about margins. It was a perfect metaphor. The founder wasn't there. That was the first warning sign. Arthur Harrington had built the airline from nothing decades ago. He was old, sharp, and usually allergic to nonsense. If he'd skipped this meeting, it meant he'd handed the keys to people who thought the business ran on vibes. Preston sat at the head of the table like he'd always belonged there. Sienna took the seat to his right, tablet already glowing. The rest of the chairs were filled with middle managers staring at the table, mentally calculating severance and mortgage payments. Okay, team, Preston said, clapping his hands once. Time to pivot. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Sienna stood and dimmed the lights. A presentation appeared on the wall. The first slide read, New Energy, in a pastel font that looked like it belonged on a wellness retreat brochure. I felt my jaw tighten. We've been analyzing performance metrics, Sienna said brightly. Ops is always reacting. Fires, delays, fixes. We want to be proactive, predict problems before they happen. That's called weather forecasting and maintenance scheduling. We already do both. A few nervous chuckles escaped from the finance side of the table. Preston shot me a look. Structural productivity, he said, for example. Sienna clicked to the next slide. A map of our Chicago hub lit up. Why do we have so many redundant flights to Milwaukee? Algorithm suggests consolidating 40% and using larger aircraft. I leaned forward. Because the secondary runway can't handle larger planes. You consolidate, you're forced into the main hub with triple landing fees. You'll burn $2 million a month just in access costs. And business commuters care about frequency, not capacity. You cut frequency, they leave. Silence. Sienna blinked, then looked at Preston. We can negotiate the fees, he said weakly. I know someone. Do you know the Port Authority? I asked. Because unless your contact is God, the rates aren't moving. Preston's face hardened. Enough. The point is, operations is bloated. We're paying for expertise we don't need. We're rolling out a new dashboard. Visualize data. Anyone can run ops. Anyone. I understood then. This wasn't efficiency, it was ego. They didn't want to need me. They wanted the system without the person who understood it. The changes started immediately. Not the smart kind, not the careful kind, the loud kind. The kind that makes consultants feel useful and professionals feel sick. Jerry was the first to go. Maintenance scheduler, bad knee, worse attitude, and a brain that could track parts inventory without looking at a screen. They replaced him with a scheduling algorithm that ordered 400 aircraft toilets and exactly 0 brake assemblies. Nobody noticed until a mechanic asked why the warehouse looked like a porcelain showroom. The night help desk was next. "Nobody flies at 3 a.m., Preston said confidently, except the cargo routes that quietly made up nearly a third of our revenue. I sent emails, long ones, short ones, charts, risk summaries, highlighted failure points in bright yellow like caution tape. Preston replied once, "Thanks for the feedback. Let's stay positive and trust the process." There was a smiley face at the end. That was when I stopped trying to convince anyone. Sienna began shadowing me, which meant she sat in my office scrolling her phone, occasionally looking up to ask questions that made my temples throb. "Why are there so many codes?" she asked one afternoon. "Can't we just color code flights? Green for good, red for bad?" "Because red doesn't tell me if I need a mechanic or a priest," I said, rerouting a delayed crew assignment. She sighed. "You're so negative. That energy is really hurting the culture." Culture. The room had gone quiet over the last week. No jokes, no betting pools on arrival times. Just people keeping their heads down and waiting. I went home on Friday, drank cheap whiskey straight from the bottle, and stared at a blank wall, thinking about how easy it is to dismantle something when you don't understand how it stays upright. I knew they were coming for me. They had to. I was the inconvenient variable. They couldn't automate around me, so they'd remove me. The problem was, they didn't know what I actually did. Over the years, I'd written thousands of lines of custom scripts to keep FlightWeave functional. They weren't official, they weren't documented, they were bridges between ancient systems and modern interfaces. I didn't delete them, that would be illegal. I wasn't a saboteur, I was a professional. I centralized them, moved every custom operational script into a single encrypted directory tied to my active credentials. If I was employed, they ran. If I wasn't, access revoked. Standard security logic. I worked late for 3 nights straight. Sienna popped in once, smiling. "Love the hustle," she said. "Just making sure everything's in the right place," I replied. By Thursday, the structure of the airline rested quietly on a load-bearing wall labeled with my username. All that remained was time. By Friday, the atmosphere had shifted from confident to brittle. The new hires Preston brought in were energetic and useless in equal measure. Young, overdressed, convinced logistics was just a prettier spreadsheet. One of them, there's always one, leaned over my desk mid-morning. "Hey Nolan, the fuel manifest is throwing a dependency error." "Admin authorization required?" I asked without looking up. "Yeah. Hit bypass, I'll clear it later." He nodded and walked off, already assuming the safety net would always be there. That was the problem. They believed the system was self-healing. They believed dashboards were brains. They believed I was replaceable because my work didn't look dramatic. The calendar invite arrived at 2:14 p.m. Meeting, HR and strategy, 3 p.m. No agenda, no subject line. That's how executions are scheduled in corporate America. Quiet, polite, deniable. I took a slow look around the OCC. The flickering screens, the worn carpet, Gus arguing with a gate agent over the phone. I loved this place, in the way soldiers love foxholes. It's ugly, but it keeps you alive. I opened my desk drawer and removed the things that mattered. An external drive, empty. A framed photo of my dog. A bottle of emergency headache pills. I slipped them into my bag. "Gus," I said, standing, "if the routing server asks for a level 5 handshake tonight, don't force it. Let it cycle." He frowned. "You going somewhere?" "Meeting," I said. "Hold the line." The elevator ride up was quiet. My heart wasn't racing. It was heavy, steady. The kind of calm you get when the decision's already been made. HR smelled like sanitizer and fear. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige people. Preston sat behind the desk like a judge on a talent show. Sienna beside him, wearing sympathy like makeup. The HR rep, Linda, avoided eye contact. "Have a seat," Preston said. The chair was lower than theirs. I stayed standing. "We've reviewed the operational restructuring," he began. Sienna jumped in. "Your approach doesn't align with our future forward vision. We need energy, flexibility, synergy." "Synergy?" I repeated. "That's the word for firing the only person who understands the system?" Her smile tightened. "That negativity is exactly the issue." Preston stood. "You're terminated, effective immediately, for insubordination and failure to adapt." Linda slid a folder across the desk. 2 weeks severance, NDA, standard. I didn't open it. I placed my badge on the desk. "Keep it," I said. "I'm not signing." Preston blinked. "Everyone signs." "Not everyone understands liability," I replied. "You're gonna need a consultant soon." He laughed. "We have the dashboard." I looked at him. "You bought a stick shift and just fired the driver at 80 miles an hour." I turned for the door as Sienna called out. "Passwords?" I smiled. "Already handled." The hallway felt cooler than the HR office, cleaner somehow. I walked, not rushed, not dramatic. At the elevator, I checked my watch. 3:07 p.m. The first major Friday push was scheduled for 4:30. Timing matters in aviation more than talent ever will. As the elevator descended, my phone vibrated in my pocket, already confused by its own future. I didn't answer. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out, crossed security without a glance back, and walked into daylight. Outside, the air smelled like jet fuel and rain. Freedom has a scent. I stopped near the curb, opened the admin app on my phone, the one tied to my credentials, the one Preston didn't know existed. Status: connected. Active user session confirmed. A warning appeared when I selected Logout. Terminating session will disable active scripts. Proceed? My thumb hovered for half a second. I thought about the smiley face email, about synergy, about being told I was replaceable by a tablet. I pressed confirm. Status: disconnected. Somewhere in the building, FlightWeave reached out for an authorization that no longer existed. I started walking. There's a bar a mile from the airport called The Last Vector. Low ceilings, sticky floors, bartender who doesn't ask questions. It's where pilots go when they've timed out, and ground crews go when they've given up on the day. I sat down at 3:22 p.m. "Rough shift?" the bartender asked. "Permanent," I said. "Tequila. Cheap." He poured. I drank. I propped my phone against the napkin holder and opened a public flight tracker. I didn't need internal access anymore. The map lit up with little aircraft icons moving exactly where they were supposed to. 3:29 p.m. Everything normal. 3:30 p.m. Cache refresh cycle. Somewhere deep in the server stack, a process tried to rebuild the bridge between crew assignments and routing logic. It found nothing. The first glitch was subtle. One flight flipped from on time to delayed. Then another. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. I took another sip. Inside the OCC, Gus would be squinting at his screen, tapping keys. Probably a sync hiccup, someone would say. They'd refresh, and when they did, the system would look for the scripts that corrected those hiccups. Access denied. Back at the bar, the map started changing faster. Yellow icons stacking, red notifications popping up. My phone buzzed again, then again. A text finally slipped through from Gus. "What the hell is happening? Gate assignments are duplicating. 2 planes taxiing for the same spot. Pilots are yelling." I didn't respond. I ordered another drink. This wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity doing its job once the support was removed. By 3:52 p.m., the delays were cascading. By 4:05, the first cancellation hit. On the TV above the bar, a news alert crawled across the screen about unexpected system disruptions at a regional carrier. I raised my glass slightly. The heartbeat I'd kept alive for 9 years had just flatlined, and for the first time, it wasn't my problem to resuscitate. By 4:30 p.m., the situation had crossed the line from messy to dangerous. When you lose reliable gate control and crew routing at the same time, the FAA doesn't wait for explanations. They issue a ground stop. That's the nuclear option. Nothing moves.
Planes already airborne divert wherever they can land. Everything else stays frozen in place. Each minute costs more than most people make in a year. The TV volume in the bar crept higher as breaking news banners multiplied. Passengers report confusion and cancellations at multiple airports. I watched families sitting on suitcases, gate agents absorbing abuse they didn't earn, pilots pacing with phones glued to their ears. My phone lit up again. This time I recognized the number. Preston. I let it ring. Again. Then a text. "Please call me. We can fix this." I finished my drink. Inside headquarters, panic had replaced confidence. According to Gus, who had stopped typing in all caps and started using punctuation, Arthur Harrington had arrived. 80 years old, cane like a weapon, voice like a thunderclap. He didn't ask questions. He demanded answers. "Who's running ops?" he barked. Silence. "Sienna is overseeing the dashboard," Preston said, already sweating through his suit. Harrington stared at her. "Where is Nolan?" No one answered fast enough. "You fired him?" Harrington asked softly. That tone was worse than shouting. Preston nodded. The realization hit him late and hard. The coyote moment. "Get him on the phone," Harrington ordered. "Now." They tried. I didn't answer, but I had left something behind. A sealed envelope in my old drawer labeled "In case of emergency."
Gus found it. He handed it to Harrington. Inside wasn't a password. It was a system map, a spider web of dependencies. In the center, circled in red, was my user directory. Attached was a copy of an old compliance agreement outlining personal workflow tools and termination protocols. At the bottom, a note. Upon termination, personal operational scripts are revoked automatically. Liability transfers to the authorizing administrator. Harrington read it twice. Then he looked at his son. "You didn't check dependencies," he said. "You purged the engine because you didn't like the dashboard." IT confirmed it minutes later. The scripts were gone. Rebuilding would take weeks. Manual operation would slow everything to a crawl. The airline was effectively dead in the water. Back at the bar, my phone buzzed again. Different number. Harrington himself. I answered. "It's a disaster," he said. "Come back. I'll fire Preston. Fire her too. Name your price." I looked at the map on my phone, at the red delays spreading like a stain. "It's not about the price," I said calmly. "It's about what happens next." He argued. He pleaded. He quoted losses. I listened, then said goodbye. I hung up. The ground stop remained, and for the first time in nearly a decade, I slept through it. Saturday morning was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No alarms, no overnight messages, no guilt. I slept until my body decided it was done, not until a server demanded attention. When I finally checked my phone, the damage was public. 80% of flights canceled, stock down double digits, analysts calling it a systemic operational failure, lawyers circling like birds that know a carcass when they see one. My voicemail was full. Preston again. HR. Legal threats that read like they were written by people who didn't understand the documents they were citing. I archived them all. Then I opened LinkedIn and changed my title to Independent Aviation Systems Consultant. One sentence below it, available immediately for legacy system integration and crisis recovery. Within minutes, messages poured in. Recruiters move fast when they smell blood. One stood out. Marcus Liu, VP of Operations at Skyspan Airlines, our largest regional competitor. Message was short. Saw the news. Assuming you're free? Lunch? I replied with a time and place. Steakhouse downtown, noon. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, smiling like a man who just watched a rival sink their own fleet. "You look rested," he said. "Unemployment agrees with me," I replied. We skipped pleasantries. "We know you built their routing logic," Marcus said. "We don't want their code. We want your brain." He slid a contract across the table. Consulting retainer. Remote. Full autonomy. The number was triple my old salary. Triple. "One condition," I said. "When I say something's broken, it gets fixed. no committees. "Done," he said without hesitation. I signed. That afternoon, Skyspan's on-time performance ticked up. On TV, Preston gave a press conference, eyes hollow, tie crooked. Reporters asked about me. He dodged. Arthur Harrington stood off to the side, staring at the floor. He already knew. The airline was bleeding passengers to Skyspan, who were happy to honor tickets for a fee. By Monday, I was working from my living room, coffee brewed properly, rewriting dispatch protocols in peace. The chaos played out on the news like a documentary I'd already finished. Preston resigned a week later. Sienna disappeared to recenter. The airline was sold at a discount months after that. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. Competence has gravity. Remove it, and everything falls exactly as it should.
The strange thing was how quickly the noise faded once it wasn't mine to manage. By the second week, the headlines moved on. Another crisis replaced the last one, another CEO promised resilience, another airline apologized for inconvenience. Meanwhile, my days settled into a rhythm that felt almost illegal. I worked when I was sharp, I stopped when I wasn't. No more adrenaline spikes at dawn, no more eating dinner out of vending machines. Skyspan's systems were flawed, but honest. They creaked, they warned you before they failed. They didn't pretend a dashboard could replace judgment. I rebuilt slowly, methodically, documenting everything, training people who actually wanted to learn. For the first time in years, I wasn't the single point of failure. That was the goal all along. Gus called me midweek. He'd made it out before the layoffs hit full speed. "They're burning through managers," he said. "Arthur's selling off routes just to stay solvent." I told him to send his resume to Marcus. He did. Gus started 2 weeks later with a raise and a normal sleep schedule. Preston's name surfaced again a month later in a trade article. Consulting startup, disruptive aviation analytics. Same language, new logo. No clients listed. Sienna reappeared briefly with a podcast about toxic workplaces and personal branding. I listened to one episode out of morbid curiosity. It was mostly ads and affirmations, nothing about consequences.
I didn't feel anger when I thought about them. That surprised me. I'd expected some lingering satisfaction, some sharp sense of victory. Instead, there was just distance, like watching weather pass on radar after you've landed safely. One evening, I stood on my balcony as a Skyspan jet passed overhead, climbing clean and on time. I raised my glass without thinking. "Fly safe," I said quietly. That was the extent of it. No speeches, no closure meeting, just a system working as intended. A month later, Arthur Harrington emailed me. Short message, no lawyers copied. He apologized. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to tell me he finally understood what he'd let go. I didn't reply. Some acknowledgments don't need responses. The industry kept moving. It always does. People forget names faster than they forget delays. But systems remember. Processes remember. And every time someone suggests replacing experience with optimism and a tablet, there's a quiet cost waiting to be paid. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a villain. I was a load-bearing wall they decided was decorative. When they pulled it out, the collapse followed physics, not emotion. And physics, unlike management trends, doesn't care what you believe.
A year later, I bought a small boat. Nothing flashy. Old, solid, dependable. I named it Override. Some habits never leave you. On quiet mornings, I take it out just far enough to hear the engine hum without interference, just far enough to remember why systems matter and why people who understand them should never be treated as optional. I still consult. I make more in a month than I used to make in a year, and I sleep through the night like someone who isn't waiting for alarms. Occasionally, someone recognizes my name at a conference or in a comment thread. They ask if the story was worth it, if burning that bridge ever feels heavy. I tell them the truth. Bridges are meant to carry weight.
When they're misused, they fail. That isn't vengeance, it's design. Preston faded the way people do when they mistake inheritance for competence. Sienna reinvented herself again. Arthur sold what remained and retired somewhere warm, far from runways and responsibility. The Airline became a case study that business schools will misinterpret for years. The lesson wasn't about automation or dashboards or culture. It was about respect, about knowing which parts of a system are decorative and which ones are structural. I still live under a flight path. Jets pass overhead every day, on schedule more often than not. When I hear them, I don't feel bitterness. I feel clarity. I did my job. I was dismissed. The system responded exactly as designed. People call it revenge because they need a story with teeth. I call it routing. Efficient, direct, inevitable. When you remove the thing that keeps the flow stable, the turbulence is not personal. It's just math.